throwing it out there. Very lovely piece of work.
Right. That's a very bold start. Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bore. Welcome to the second day of Digital Innovation Week Wales. I'm Michael Gubbins, for those of you who weren't here yesterday. I'm Michael Gubbins from Film Cymru Wales. And thanks for those who connected with me yesterday. Instead, if you want to get hold of, if you want to see my tweets or the report I'll do on it, it's Sampo Media is my hashtag on Twitter, and sampomedia.com is the website. So just that's enough about me. Let's talk about yesterday. This is how the story went. Let's recap on the story so far. When we started yesterday morning, a digital revolution had broken out. A man with a ponytail said it was a digital deluge in which tons of new content had arisen, and crazy machines had come in, and it had disrupted our business models. It had changed our social relationships and created something of a digital divide. And what the horsey-haired one, who's a guy from Microsoft called Dave Coplin, was suggesting, and he did really well, the Microsoft guy, by the way, to go through a whole presentation, really manfully not mentioning any other products that weren't from. So everyone had got their iPads and iPhones out, and anyway, he did very well on that. But his point was he thought there'd be the rise of the humans. And a big theme during the day really was the key had been a shift in thinking from the time when we were talking about machines all the time and what they were doing to us, the internet and the effect on our existing business. And we were beginning to talk much more about that intersection between people and content that was enabled by, but not necessarily ruled by, technology. So this became much more exciting, and we started looking at what the potential was in this. And I think we heard about all kinds of creative opportunities. But we also heard how this could connect us with our past, for example. So the digital archives discussion was really about how people and history could come together in a way that made for a very dynamic and culturally rich kind of experience. So lots of opportunities there. And we heard about a force that was on our side, which was data. And the rethinking that when we were talking about data is it wasn't those shiny ones and zeros from all those PowerPoint presentations that we see. Data was the digital means of expressing human behavior. It was a way of understanding how our customers thought. It was a way of understanding how all of us interacted with each other. It was a way of understanding behavior generally. And I think the discussion at the end really got onto the idea that open data, open access to data, not stuff that was controlled or stuff that was done for us, but a world of open data was one in which we could win. We could actually start collaborating with each other. We could start doing exciting new things in new ways. We could take our old institutions and offer new ways of working. And the other thing that I think became really clear out of that discussion was there was that opportunity of seeing the audience not as a passive thing that we do things for, but actually potentially a partner, a co-creator, a collaborator. And so this all got very exciting. The reality that kept crashing in, if you recall yesterday, was that it was that feeling that culturally we were still stuck in an age of institutions. We were still stuck in a world where we needed to change our thinking about what we were for, who those audiences actually were, what this technology was for, what we did, and where the money was. It wasn't a scarcity economy anymore. This was an economy of abundance and experience, and we needed to find new ways of doing business. So we were all getting very excited, and at the end of the day, I think we got a very passionate vision, I think, of if we take Wales as the core of our discussion, of a place that had opportunities to renew and refresh its culture. It was a Wales in which the way that we interact with each other, the way we interact with society was going to be different and more exciting. There was a way in which business could actually find new ways of interacting with its customers, and there was a way that Wales could see its position on the international stage change. This could be the heart of our economic kind of thinking going forward. So that was day one. It should have ended with a shot of the Brecon Beacons, with the sun slowly rising over the top, fade to black, generic Celtic music going on. And then today, the lights come back up, and we're now on day two, where we're talking about digital and creativity is what we're calling it today, but actually we're talking again. We are we're going back to the action at that intersection of people and technology again. And what we're going to be talking about today, I think, is really where things are happening, where people are genuinely exploring the potential of these new areas. And one of the things we heard yesterday was, what is it that's going to make and open up this future? I think for a lot of the people we spoke to yesterday, their thought was that what will change when people start doing things, when there are things that are measurable that you can look at and people have actually seen how this works. So it's the showing rather than telling. And I think that's our theme all through today will be, let's see this stuff in action. Let's see the reality of what we're talking about here so that we can start getting excited about things, proper things, rather than theories. So that's my introduction to today. Hopefully that's useful. And for our first panel, we're calling this the impact of digital technology and creativity and creative processes, but we're talking about rather more than that, I think. I mean, creativity, I think, in lots of ways is being redefined anyway. And what we've got here is three people, with same format as yesterday. We've got three people who will give presentations of their own kind of work and their own take on things. We have Paula Ledieu at the end there, who I know very well from work at the BFI and in film, working with Mozilla at the moment. We were actually talking earlier, being someone who's been working in this field for a long time, but really has been someone I think who's helped a lot of people think differently. And over the years, I think lots of people, one way or another, have come into Paula's orbit and I think benefited from that. Catherine Dukes, I think the National Theatre at Film Cymru Wales, we're always looking at the stuff that's going on in the National Theatre. I think have for a long time been trying to work out how do you take content, or how do you take those kind of creative ideas outside the theatre as an institution and actually take it out to people. I think there's a very passionate drive there. And again, a number of people yesterday in talking about Wales were arguing that that Wales starts with this. It's almost like something we don't have to do. That idea of access and actually engaging with people is something which is part of the culture historically, I think. And I think that kind of drive is something we're going to be hearing lots about. And Sarah Ellis is going to take us also into the world of theatre, moving outside from the Royal Shakespeare Company. So just a quick, before we start the first of those presentations from Paula, normally they tell you to turn off your phone, but we're going to tell you to turn it on. The hashtag is up there. Yesterday it was really useful to have people sending in questions via Twitter. So if you're going to tweet some points as it goes along, that can help inform the discussion we have afterwards. Okay, are we all ready? I'll explain at the end of this some other things that are going on around the building today, but Paula, maybe you could kick off.
Waiting for Luke. Brilliant. Thank you, Mike, for a great introduction, and thank you too for making it here first thing. I know it's always tough to make it first thing for the first speaker, so I'm very grateful. As Mike said, my name is Paula. So please do include me in that discussion. As Mike said, really the thing that I was asked to speak about today was the impact that digital technologies are having on creativity and creative processes. But I wanted to start with a quick question. How many people here really understand digital technologies? Fantastic. Okay. We'll put to one side the slightly laboured way that I asked that question. But the reason that I asked is that very many of you did not put your hands up. And one of the things that I want to do today is to try and get us away from the sort of polemic of digital technologies as being the thing that we should focus on. And it sounds like yesterday some of this discussion already sort of started to manifest itself. And really sort of get away from this idea that it's a change machine, that the machines are actually what are changing us, as opposed to how we are developing and using machines in new and interesting ways. And let's face it, it's not clear which direction that we're going in. It's incredibly early days in the advent of the sort of the digital technology sphere. And so I want us to sort of step away from this idea that digital technologies is the thing that we should be focusing on, and instead encourage us to really think about how we are changing the way that we fuel and manifest creativity. And yes, technology is a part of that. But I would argue that there are many other pieces to the puzzle. And to leave those out really is to do ourselves and our own capacity for creativity a great disservice. I also have another reason for wanting to encourage us to sort of move away from this focus, if you like, on digital technologies. And it's that when we really do put that discrete focus on digital technologies, we make it other. We make it something that is outside our sphere. We make it something that actually the vast majority of people in this room don't feel that they have agency in. The reality is, if I can ask you all to put up your hands if you have a mobile phone, so you know something about digital technologies. I mean, you're engaging in a digital dialogue all day, every day, I suspect. And so really I want us to move away from this idea of digital technologies as being something discrete. A quick sidebar here. Even as I'm saying this, there has never been a greater need for us to be critically engaging with digital technology. And so it's not that I don't want us to critique and engage with it, but when we're talking about art, culture, creativity, I think it doesn't do us a great disservice to sort of think about it as this thing that is discrete, that is other, rather to think of it as part of the scaffolding, part of the sort of pervasive context in which we are now creative, in which we now develop our culture. One of the great thought leaders, James Bridle, in this space, I think really starts to help us understand a little bit more about the nature of digital technologies. And he describes it as this invisible and intangible sort of digital architecture. And I think that is both problematic, as he illustrated in his most recent article, but it can also be a really useful and powerful way for us to just simply let it fade into the background as we think about our cultural lives. And so in that respect, I'm actually really much more interested in what's going on at the Barbican at the moment, where we have a group of artists who are really quite viscerally responding against this idea that there is this thing called dev art, art made from code, as if it's this sort of new thing, as if it's this something that is distinctive. And instead that they're arguing it's just art. Let's not bring this sort of obsessive focus on the technologies, on the materiality of what we're doing, but instead let's just think about it as creativity. Let's just think about it as art. And so it is with that that I sort of want to frame the discussion. Having said all of that, I am going to talk about a manifestation of digital technologies, which is the network. And when I say network, I really am talking about the sort of the vast abstraction that is the technical network. I'm talking about the sort of the heaving mass of our social interactions that take place across networks. I'm talking about the sort of the gorgeous connective nodes that actually make up the internet. This is a fantastic picture created in 2010 as part of the Opto project, where what you're looking at is actually every node of the internet made manifest. I'm also talking about, and again, just a quick reference here, this image breaks my open web heart every time I look at it. But I am also talking about the vast content space that is the web. But perhaps most importantly, as per my earlier comments, I'm talking about us, the weird and wonderful connections that are now made possible, where we can connect with both the mythological, the fictional, but also, most importantly, us. We now all have and are part of a network. So I want to talk a little bit about that and particularly bring to bear the tours of duty that I have done through a number of the large cultural organisations, most notably the BBC and the BFI, and sort of think about what are some of the attributes of the network and how do we want to really rethink those institutions in light of the attributes of that network and the way that we are engaging with it. So one of the attributes that I want to focus on is collaboration. So really collaboration is something that the network has facilitated at a grand scale. And I think importantly it's facilitated in a way that's asynchronous. So I can make a contribution, but I don't need to be in the same time, the same temporal space or the same physical space. I can collaborate anonymously. I don't need to actually know you. There's this sort of grand capacity for working together. Probably the most obvious example of this is Wikipedia, but frankly it's sort of somewhat glib. There are many, many examples of this. And I think when we think about our cultural organisations, I think this notion of collaboration is perhaps one of the most challenging that they face. And the reason is that the nature of collaboration across the network is that it is predicated on an affordance of the network, which is that we're all nodes on that network. There is a degree of a quality, that's too strong a word, but there is a sense that everyone has the capacity and can make a contribution. And our cultural institutions find this really challenging because the nature of their relationship with a public is very much a broadcast model. It's very much, I say, you listen, fantastic, we're done. The network actually requires that engagement is, I have something to say, you have something to say. In other words, it's a discourse, it's a discussion. We each bring something to that discussion, but everybody has the capacity to have something to say within that discussion. So for our cultural organisations, this is threatening. There are whole issues around who has the authority, who is credible in that space. It also brings to bear a whole bunch of anxieties about, at a very personal level, I've spent the last 20 years of my life becoming an expert in X. Clearly, therefore, I am an expert in X. This is validated by the fact that I work within a cultural organisation, which is further validated by the fact that it's my name at the curator line or at the programmer line or at the critique line. And then suddenly someone writes a blog post critiquing the very same thing. How do I personally engage with that? How do I respond to that? Because clearly they're not an expert. Clearly they don't have authority, clearly they don't have credibility. So this notion of collaboration, I think, is a really, really challenging one for cultural organisations. Another one that I want to spend just a little bit of time on is this idea of the iterative or iteration. I could have equally have sort of thought about this in terms of sort of never done. In the coding world, we talk a lot about, you know, push early, push often. What that means is get it out there as early as you possibly can, get engagement with it, get eyes on it. And in many respects, this idea of iteration sort of in the open, in a way that allows people to engage with it, is actually the cornerstone of collaboration as well. So actually surfacing your thinking, surfacing your ideas very early allows for greater collaboration, allows for more people to be able to connect to that. For those of you who are familiar with our cultural organisations, this is also an extremely challenging prospect. It's also a really challenging prospect for the academy as well. Both are very used to polishing things to the nth degree and not putting it out there as part of the discussion space until it's done, until it's perfect. The network, however, the affordances of the network really encourages us to actually just put things out there. See how people respond, see what ideas come back, see how people build on that. So again, really challenging for our cultural organisations to be able to sort of wrap their heads around this idea that they might put out something half-formed, that they might put out something that doesn't feel complete. And again, a very, very sort of difficult prospect for them. And then the final one that I wanted to spend a couple of moments on is this notion of non-rivalous. Sorry, it's a legal term. It's a very awkward one, but it actually sort of it also is very helpful. Really, this idea that the network has really given us a world in which we can take a copy, but in doing so, we do not remove anything from the public sphere. Nothing disappears when we take a copy. Nothing is damaged. It's not diminished in any way. It doesn't degrade in other way. We can. I'll be happy to have a conversation with a computer scientist about this statement, but for the purposes of this discussion, there is no degradation despite how many copies I make in the digital world across the network. And again, when we think about this in the context of our cultural organisations, this is really a very, very challenging prospect, because our cultural organisations, or actually particularly those with collections, were largely predicated on the idea of scarcity. There is only one of this, or there is a limited number of this thing. We need to collect it and protect it so that actually the public can engage with that in a way that is more equitable. So the idea of sort of public art collections, even the library, this idea that there is sort of a limited amount, there is a scarce resource. And suddenly the network sort of explodes that. I can make as many copies of the Mona Lisa as I would like. Now we can have a whole rich conversation over a glass of wine about the experience of engaging with the digital copy versus the real copy. Absolutely. But in real terms, the network does give us this non-rivalous world of materials, world of knowledge, world of inspiration that we don't need to simply use as something that we consume, but that we can actually draw on and use, as Matt Jones said years ago, the creative loam of our work. It becomes part of. And we see this in remix culture, reuse culture, we see this in sort of mashups, all of that side of things. But more specifically, I think of it as quotable culture. We're in a world where actually we can quote culture really very easily without making any sort of serious damage to the work, the original work. So when we're thinking about our cultural organisations, I think it's really vital that we think about those affordances of the network and how those affordances are driving different behaviours in ourselves and the way that we think. And with that in mind, I'm going to go slightly off-piste, so bear with me here, folks, because I want to push us just a little bit. I started by saying that I want to sort of encourage us to be moving away from this idea that digital technologies is what we should be focusing on. And as Mike kindly said, I've been talking about this stuff for a long time, and working with folks who just find it really alienating. As soon as I say, you really must understand the digital world, it's vital that you understand it. And it just, as I said before, feels as if it's too other, it's too outside of their purview. And so I've been struggling for a while to really think about how can we reframe the way that we think about creativity today, the way that we think about art, the way that we think about culture today. And try and encourage us to move beyond the sort of the polemics of digital versus analog or broadcast versus network, and instead to start to think about an idea about slow art versus fast art, or slow culture versus fast culture. And I'm deeply indebted to a conversation that I started yesterday at the Tate Modern around some of this thinking. And really what I'm trying to unpack here is, rather than differentiating the way that we create as being digital creativity or analog creativity or network creativity, is to really encourage us to think about a framing about the nature of creativity and what it actually is. And for the purposes of this argument, I'm going to contend that creativity is a manifestation of our thinking. And if we think about that, then when we start to think about what culture is, again, for the purposes of this conversation, a discussion. It's an ongoing discourse that the society has, in which we manifest moments of our own creativity or our own response to the world that we live in. And so when I talk about sort of slow art or slow culture, what I really mean is when that discourse is really very slow and massively asynchronous. And so an example might be that I live in the world. I have a thought, an idea that I want to communicate, and I create a piece of art. It might be a painting. That painting gets hung on a wall. People come and see that work. But it's all part of a very slow discussion where I am communicating, people looking at that work are taking that idea, folding it into their own thinking, which then informs their own expression. It's a very slow conversation. What I'm arguing is that when we come to digital, when we come to that network world, all we've done is vastly speed up that discussion. It's now possible for us to express ideas and to get that feedback, to get that discussion, that discourse going far more rapidly. And so the thought that I want to leave you with is that I think one of the great challenges that we all have when we're thinking about creativity, and particularly the cultural organisations, the challenge that they have is in that vastly sped up discussion, discourse, how do we recognise the work? How do we recognise that manifestation of creativity? How do we separate that from the discourse? Because it's moving so quickly and we're iterating so fast and we're collaborating now at such a scale that the idea of our work, our creative expression, I think is now almost indistinguishable from the conversation that we're having. I'm going to leave it right there with that thought. Thank you very much.
Catherine, while you go and set up, let me just ask you your thoughts very quickly while you're doing this, Paula. Sorry, you're not allowed to run away yet. Are you going to get your laptop?
It's all right. I don't need it.
I'm sure it will come your way. You'd sell it. Sell that laptop. Do you think institutions, I mean, from your point of view, the institutions that you have worked with, have you seen signs of change during the last kind of 10 years or so? Is there a beginning of do you see signs of an understanding of the potential and the opportunities, or do you think institutions are still struggling with this?
I think the answer is yes and yes. So I definitely have seen change within the institutions. I think they're still profoundly struggling. My colleagues on the stage are absolute heroes because they continue to work within contexts where, quite frankly, they have a dual role as educators. They are literally every day teaching their peers and their colleagues how to understand this world. But they're also trying to forge new creative ground at the same time. Right. And I think, you know, this challenge where we have one or two sort of digital heroes within our institution, we tend to burn them out, which isn't great. But also, again, it's too easy for folks within those institutions to just treat it as other, is to treat it as this thing that sort of happens over there. And I think, you know, part of what I wanted to say today was we somehow need to reframe that discussion. Folding of our culture.
Right, let's hold that thought for the discussion. We move. You're definitely here. Are you feeling burned out, Catherine?
I'm not yet. No,
not
I'm
yet.
Still okay.
Okay. What the National Theatre of Wales is saying, definitely heroes in this kind of area. So, Catherine, over to you.
So, hello everyone. As I said, my name's Catherine. I'm Digital Associate at National Theatre of Wales, and I'm thrilled to be with you all today. I think we've got about 15 minutes for me to talk at you, and then we're going to have questions again afterwards. So I'm going to split that down the middle, and I'm going to talk half about NTW and our approach to digital, and then focus in on a couple of case studies that might be useful in the conversation that we have. So I'm hoping that because we're in Cardiff, this will be like a resounding hands up, but how many people have been to a National Theatre of Wales show here? Yeah, great. Cool, that makes things more simple. So we were created in 2009 to be the English language National Theatre, and currently playing is our Year 1 trailer to give you an example of some of the work that we do. In the first year at NTW, we created 13 pieces of work, so that was one a month plus a bonus, which ranged in size from a piece for 12 people that led people around a town and ended up with an audio walk, and the end of the piece you met the choir that you'd heard on the audio walk, and then ranged in scale to 12,000 people watching a durational 72-hour piece of theatre across an entire town, which ended up with us crucifying Michael Sheen, which, as you could imagine, is the best way to end any play. So quite some differences in scale there. We're quite a small core team for a national company. There's about 14 of us, with a fluctuating group of freelancers and collaborators, team members, community groups, friends, collaborators, all the words and companies that we work with on each of our productions. I quite like that slide, it's quite exciting, isn't it? Bit of a gif. You may know that we're a company without a building, so we do have a shop front down in the Castle Arcade, and we use that as a base from which we then make work all over the country. Quite often we'll move the entire organisation to the place that we're making work to be resident in that place while we're rehearsing and making the work. That's not just the production team, but everyone from the finance team to the admin to communications. We all go and live in the place that we're making work in. To try and do something like that, you have to be built in a really agile way, and you have to have technology at the heart of the way that you operate and what you do. All of our systems are set up right to be working in this way. So quite literally sometimes this was last year's summer camp, and it's not an unusual setup to have a computer tethered to your phone so that you can work from fields or forests or aircraft hangars or the side of mountains. To give you some core examples, we don't have a server. Rather, all of our documents are stored in the cloud. Each staff member is equipped with a laptop and a mobile phone with an uncapped data allowance so that we can get online, Welsh signal depending. to communicate and collaborate from anywhere in the country. And when the signal does fail us, which sometimes does happen, we have a trusty, I think it's like 200 quid domestic satellite that we've thrown up everywhere, from like the roof of a school in Edinburgh to most recently quite precariously perched in a World War I trench in Usk, which was quite nice. Our ways of working with each other and our ways of creating work happen rather organically online because of the way that we're all encouraged to use digital tools. And I think it really democratises the way that we use digital within the organisation, because it's sort of everybody's responsibility. There's no excuse for people not to be looking after digital or thinking about digital in their work. So where do I fit in with all of this? I'm not bending. I don't know why I picked that image. But I joined the company about 2 and a bit years ago. And the digital associate role was a new one to the organisation. It was intended as a 1-year role to work across the company's upcoming productions. So my role sits within the creative team. I'm line managed by John McGrath. And on each of the productions, I get loaned out, in a sense, to the directors that we're working with to produce and design the digital element of our productions. I always think of the role in sort of like a 50-50 split between a bit of dramaturgy, like digital dramaturgy we're calling it, which is a bit of a term that I'm playing with, and digital producing. I also look at wider ideas around technology, so how you can gather audiences around your ideas, how we can collaborate with technologists to be more risky in the work that we're doing. I also look after some of our special projects. So we're currently working on a Nesta-funded digital R&D project that's looking at how you embed data capture into the creative process. We've got another project that's looking at online platforms for collaboration for artists. And then we try to run other schemes that are set out to develop digital capacity and work around Wales, like the Digital Producers Labs, which Vic and the gang are going to talk about later. Vic and the gang, like Cool in the Gang, but better. So it's my personal aspiration that digital shouldn't be treated as some sort of special thing that comes and adds a layer of complexity and budget constraints that nobody wants. We don't want to force the use of the same technology on every project. So we start from a place of working out what story we want to tell first, and then the technology comes second. We see digital as just another tool for artists and production teams, just like costume or set or sound. And it's just another way for them to realise their vision for a project. So I'll be asked to speak specifically about some productions. So I'm going to do that next. So probably the most famous digital production that we've done has been Bradley Manning. Bradley Manning was a soldier in the US Army who was accused of leaking sensitive information to WikiLeaks. Since the piece was very much about freedom of information and digital surveillance, we wanted to open the show out to a wider audience, but also think about the experience for the online viewer. So we decided to stream the show live every night, every performance, alongside a chat function and links to further information about the themes and events mentioned in the play. The show was first done in Wales, in Bradley's old high school, and then we took it to Edinburgh and revamped the digital site. We had guest hosts on the live stream chat each night. Statistically, our most popular night was hosted by Alexa O'Brien, who was the journalist who provided an extensive archive of the only available transcripts at Manning's closed trial. She was joined on the chat by our writer, Tim Price. Over the run, I'm going to hit some stats at you now, but over the run we had around 6,500 audience members from over 1,000 cities in 100 countries. 56% of the audience were based in the UK, which is probably to be expected, while other considerable audience bases were from the US, Germany, Japan, Canada, Ireland, Netherlands. When watching the real-time stats, one of my favourite things on mobile or tablet devices. So from feedback on the chat, I know that someone was watching on a bus in Australia, which I quite liked. Without an ad buy, we grew the audience on live stream to around 20,000 followers, which is what we've got on there now. I think that's partly because we've got good social media networks, word of mouth, good press activity, but also I think that we were probably trapped in a favourable algorithm on on livestream.com, and we keep being shown when people join the site as someone interesting to follow. So that's quite nice. It's nice when technology and algorithms give you a little boost like that. So the next production I want to talk to you about is Coriolanus, which was directed by Mike Pearson and Mike Brooks, and was a version of Shakespeare's Coriolanus. Instead of using digital technology like we did in Bradley to disseminate the work to a wider audience and involve a wider group of people in the conversations around the piece, we use live camera feeds within the performance itself to enhance the audience experience. So audience members heard the speech and sounds through headphones using silent disco technology, and were free to move around the amazing aircraft hangar that we were staging the piece in. 2 large screens, which you can see there in the centre of the space, also showed the live action that was being filmed. So some people sat and watched the screens, and some people got really close to the actors, so it was nice that you could have that dual experience. Screens within the production, the filming, editing, cameras, the tech was all on display for people, for the audience to acknowledge and engage with. And yet the story was still the central element to the piece, with the tech being used because there was a dramatic reason for it. And the digital within this production was a stylistic choice led by the creative team, which I think was really important. So I thought I would end by talking about the piece that I'm currently working on, which has just been announced. If you've not heard yet, we're making a show on Snowdon. Which will be fun. I bought walking boots. It's all going to be great. So The Gathering is a piece that's been in development for about 3 years now. It's been created by Louise Wilson, who's been observing a National Trust farm on the mountain for 3 years. And the production will feature new poetry by Wales's national poet Gillian Clarke, with sound, film and movement all integrated into installations and performances that the audience will experience along the 6-kilometre walk that they'll take during the performance, which will start at the farm and then go through the foothills of Snowdon. We'll be performing the work each day, rain or shine, with a cast which includes 600 very bemused sheep. Some of them there, because they're going to be forced up and down the mountain each day to take part in the performance. But this, I hope, the reason that I'm talking about this now, which is often quite difficult to talk about projects that you're making, but I hope it's going to be one of those dream projects where there's both a creative appetite and a logistical need for digital technology to be used within the performance. Not everybody is going to want to go on a 6-kilometre walk around a mountain, and so I think it's really important that we find ways to offer this experience to a wider audience. But also we're going to be using the technology that we use and the way of disseminating it will also be used within the performance itself, so feeding back into the performance. So there's a creative need for this technology as well. So it's something that's going to be quite special. If you're interested in getting involved in the project, then do come and chat to me as well. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
And just while George, go to set yours up. While I mean, it's such inspiring stuff. I mean, it's amazing what you're achieving. I just wonder, with the directors that you're working with, how much different directors actually accept or understand what you're doing, or are you at the stage now where you're they're beginning to look for directors that understand this?
I don't think that we look necessarily for that. We're trying to make good work, and sometimes it's okay for that not to be a digital thing. So the show that we've just closed at the weekend, Mammoths, which was in a World War I trench, our digital strategy was not to do anything. You know, it felt like something that was a piece that felt like it should be experienced in the room and or in the field, in the trench, as it were. And so that's okay.
But that's a really important bit with this. I think a lot of people are concerned with a lot of this kind of cross-media work, that it's loads more work for a lot of not more returns. But you're saying different projects have different kind of needs, and that you try and work those.
And the key thing actually that's been really useful is that in the first year we had some problems because I was starting late into projects, so just coming in and trying to make stuff happen. But now I've been here 2 years, I think it's easier because I'm right at the start of the process. It also helps that you know, I'm line managed by someone who understands digital really, really well. So, you know,
it's quite a big deal.
It really helps. So.
Okay, I think we've got Sarah. You're all lined up now. Fantastic.
My name's Sarah, and I work for a cultural institute called the RSC. And to start off today's talk, I want to show you a video of a digital experiment that we did last year. And if we could kick off with that, that'd be great. Thank you.
if thou lovest me, then, steal forth thy father's house tomorrow night, and in the wood, a league without the town, there shall I stay for thee.
I will go tell him of fair Hermia's flight. Then to the wood he will tomorrow night pursue her.
I know a bank where the wild thyme blows, where oxlips and the nodding violet grows. The snake throws her enamelled skin, weed wide enough to wrap a fairy in.
Did appear.
So good night unto you all. Give me your hands, if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a context of what I'm going to talk to you about today, because we're looking at technology in the creative process, but my role at the RSC is to look at the past, present and the future, and accept and understand and embrace the fact that we've been innovating in society, Shakespeare, for the last 400 years, and through that things have changed and evolved according to how audiences relate to that work, but also what we can accept that are the macro innovations. For example, the printing press emerged, but it was 25 years later when we actually started printing in English, which actually unlocked an access point to people using that technology for themselves. So that's very much on my mind, and also how we look at taking innovation forward and use the learning and strengths of cultural institutions. But there's something really important to say, is, and referencing what Paul is talking about, I completely agree with. It's actually looking at slow iteration and also fast iteration, and knowing your strengths and also liking yourself for your weaknesses, which is really important. So I'm going to run through on that project some specific examples of what I think the key components and new parameters are around digital technology, and how that informs your process, how it informs your creative thinking. And the first bit to say is that we have devices to tell stories. Theatre has evolved, oral traditions have evolved, and now every single person in this room has acknowledged this morning that they have a mobile phone, probably have a laptop. We should also not forget that we are in the first world, and that when we talk about access on a global level, we are part of an enabled community, and that should not be far from our minds. But it's important to know that people can receive culture on this, can make culture on this, and therefore it's a meeting point that we should be innovating and experimenting with. So, for Midsummer Night's Dreaming, which was a true experiment for the organisation, what we wanted to look at is co-creation, and also how we worked with our communities. We have a very, very strong core audience, but there is a global community of Shakespeare. So what we did was we didn't talk as an organisation, we talked as Billy Shakespeare. And we changed the way we connected with the world, and that was a great vehicle for us. And that enabled people to come in their own way, in a creative way, in a playful way, and allowed an institution to talk differently in a different voice. And it's important to say that we don't just create a community, we have to connect with communities, and we have to not expect our own community to be a landing point. We are all working in buildings, and we have people come to them. And actually part of what the networked world is connectivity, and actually it's important to go to other people's places. The other thing that's important to look at are the new forms of content and the multiplicity of content points for audiences to engage in your work. And what we did with Midsummer Night's Dreaming was experiment with lots of different ways we could create creative content online. And some of it we got right, some of it we didn't. And over the course of the weekend, we created 3,000 pieces of content over 24 hours, which was a piece of content being shared every 5 minutes manually. So we didn't get much sleep. And 1,000 of those pieces of content were people in the real world, and who I would say are our collaborators that took part. So what, as theatre companies or as any art form has got to acknowledge, is that the forms or the places that you can put your creative content have changed, but we can't just parachute that content into that space. You've got to think about what that means for the creativity, how long do people listen to a SoundCloud audio file, what does text look like on a screen as opposed to print. All those sorts of things are important and need to be addressed. What we also did in Midsummer Night's Dreaming is we didn't want to change any Shakespeare text, but what we wanted to do was illuminate the world of the play through social media and the socialness of Shakespeare is what we were looking at. What would a piece of theatre look like on the internet today? And so we created a story world. And to say with the rigour and the thinking behind this was really important, and we used the traditional theatre process to look at that. So the performance of an actor on stage, the amount of thinking, the time, the rehearsal, the physicalisation, embodiment of that text that goes into that performance, it needs the same amount of interrogation and thought and care if you're going to put a story world out there for your audiences. And that we shouldn't negate that time on process, and we shouldn't negate rigorous intellectual thinking around our online content for us to enable a new conversation around that. So we took the worlds of the play, which were the court, the lovers, the fairies, the mechanicals, and we created new characters that had their own voices, and that allowed us to commission new artists, not necessarily theatre practitioners, but animators, filmmakers, artists that we thought worked well on the internet to play with the text. But often we put content out there, but we don't create a pathway. It's a bit like baking a cake and then forgetting to invite people around to eat it with you. And we're really good at that, I think, particularly if we're into telling people what we think of the world. And again, it goes back to what we've been talking about this morning around networks. We've got to identify what your content pathways are, and you've got to be clear about that and follow that through. It's like a line of an argument, it's like a debate. If we're putting work out on social media, we need to be clear where we're putting it, who we're talking to, and how they can access that. Otherwise, we are just broadcasting out to nothingness, and we need to make sure that we don't do that, because that's an opportunity missed. So what do the content pathways give us? They give us meeting points. They give us analog meeting points. They give us online meeting points. What they do is create a multiplicity of opportunity for those stories that are found on devices, are found in the real world, to become a great collection of narrative, of stories for people to piece together. And I think this is a fundamental challenge in the work, is how do we make sense of all these different narratives and stories, and why we chose to look at the live experience, which we performed over on real time. The play was performed over 3 days, and the scenes took place in the time of the play, allowed us pivotal moments to come together live and online, and it allowed us to be together, to get the collectivism and the real-time moment of the play performed and also shared. And we should acknowledge that not everyone can be there. So how do we make the experiences for the people that can't be in the room as meaningful as the people there? And often we need to do a lot more around that. So one way we looked around that was co-creation. What we did was we allowed mobile phone devices into the room for people to share, like and share, and upload their own version of the play. And in my mind, I think this is a form of streaming under people's own broadcast channels, which are their own social media, which I think is a really interesting moment to go into if we're looking at that person there is recording that scene in the play that they like and will share it under their terms, starts streaming out the play through lots of people's angles and perceptions of the play, but instead of talking about it afterwards retrospectively, they're in it. So then that makes us an audience of makers. They're making that content, they're being part of the story world, they're part of the play. But really, I think this is becoming quite an old term already, because we talk about audience as passive, we talk about audiences being told and us sharing what we think those audiences want. But I think audiences are already doing this. I think we are a world of makers and inventors and have ideas. And the openness of a networked world allows us to share those. And really, it's about how these two different practices converge, and what does an institution say, and what does an individual say, and how can we get that out there. So what we're talking about really is connecting the experience. And we're still working that through. And the learning from an experiment on this scale, in this way, allows us to look at meaningfully what's next and how it can inform our next work. The play itself reached 30 million people on social media. Glimpse narrative, not entire play, but that's something for us to really take back and understand and help us think about what can we do with that? How can we transform that, and how can we get that into our thinking? So really what we're talking about are new rituals for culture. Everything that all the slides that I've just talked about are just different rituals. You probably came here today, rushed in, and probably went to the loo on your way in, grabbed a cup of coffee or something like that, and we're here. And that sort of time when you entered the building and came in here was probably very brief. When you got here, you're keeping your mobile phones on, but if you were seeing a piece of theatre, you'd probably turn it off. And we don't realise that that's a ritual that's evolved over time, and it wasn't always the same. In Henry Irving's time, we used to see 2 farces, then a Shakespeare play. It was a whole evening of entertainment, slower, more social. In the Elizabethan times, people were talking amongst us, and in the sentiment of the theatre now, you get told to be quiet for rustling a sweet packet. These are rituals, these are rules, these are forms that have emerged. New technology is about the real world informing you how we use it. The humans are telling you how to use this technology, and what we're looking at is how technology can make those rituals change and evolve to something more exciting. So what are the new opportunities? The opportunity, I think, is about the convergence of these ideas, but it's also not looking at digital as a solution. It's not being led by a device, it's about what you do with it. And what culture's really good at is asking why. Why are we doing this? What's this for? Who's this for? And if we can get it right in the dialogue between the world of individuals and the cultural institutions, we can create a really interesting debate around why, and actually enable culture to ask the big meaty questions around this work at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, have we got some questions on Twitter there? Just to ask you something, just as something I think all of you, perhaps just the starting point of the discussion, but maybe starting with you where you've got something very specific like the Shakespeare Company. Is what we're seeing, those rituals aren't necessarily negative things, are they? The ritual of going to the theatre and turning off your mobile phone, and the ritual of going to the cinema, for example, and turning off your phone. Are you suggesting that different elements of the experience have, they work differently? You can fit all these together to create something rich.
I think you've got to create the right experience for the right audience and what you want to do, and that comes from the idea. It doesn't make sense just to go, well, we have to have all our mobile phones in there in the theatre. That's a really crass, reductive way to look at it. But if someone wanted to create a piece of work that experimented with that and looked at the meaning of that, that's an interesting proposition. So that's the difference, and I think that's why we need to create a rigor in our thinking around why we're doing this.
Okay, and just quickly for you, Paula, on that, because you talked about fast culture and slow culture. Are these things where fast culture is replacing slow culture, or is what you're suggesting, so a film, for example, takes 2 years to make, that actually you can inject a whole lot of fast culture elements within that to create something that actually enriches the slow culture product?
Absolutely. I don't see them as replacing. I see it more as a spectrum, and as a way for us to sort of understand the way that our existing cultural manifestations, like theatre, like our gallery spaces, sit alongside new kinds of cultural manifestations. And I think there is absolutely a desperate and lingering need for long, thoughtful responses to the world around us, as well as the more frenetic responses that we're seeing increasingly, for example, the discussion we'll be having today on Twitter.
And Catherine, that's kind of what you're doing as well. It's that it's bringing together, it's finding that right bit. I'm kind of wondering how you know instinctively whether something's going to work or not work, or whether it's all experimentation at the moment. You know, this bit will work as a digital project, as a, you know, how do you get that sense of what might work?
I think it's a little bit about refining as you go along as well, though. So, you know, if we try something, if we're doing something across a whole run of a show, then we've got 3 weeks of iteration, you know, of retrying stuff and changing things slightly.
We're going back to the iteration idea. Okay, let's go to the question. This is something that came up a lot yesterday as well. It's that digital divide thing again. Are we actually creating nicer experiences for the people who are already engaged, or are we actually increasing the kind of reach and engagement to people who are perhaps disconnected culturally and perhaps disconnected in terms of technology as well? Maybe start with you, Sarah.
I don't think it's a. I think it's a profound issue, not a digital issue. I think we should be doing it in our live and whatever we call digital is. Digital just shouldn't be the tick in the box to say we've done access or engagement. I think that's really important. I think it's about the ethos of your cultural institution that is genuinely interested in the issues of the world, how we tour our work, where we tour our work, how we make. It's a challenge, and so I think we do have to address those left behind, and it is a moral responsibility, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes a great deal of sense. It's a big statement, though. That is an important point. The idea of a moral responsibility for art to reach, particularly public-funded art, to reach beyond its...
We had a conversation this week, and I would say I wouldn't be at the RSC if it wasn't for being part of some really brilliant grassroots organisations, and hopefully have been employed on the basis of bringing that thinking into the organisation. And that we have to keep everything as diverse as possible, so it's not just siloed into technology serves this purpose.
Just any of you, how do you measure this? I mean, we were talking a lot yesterday about soft evidence and hard evidence, that you can do nice things and give people theoretical access, but to make it actually happen on the ground seems to me something that requires some form of measurement. Is that something you do?
I think that, like, making it everyone's responsibility in the organisation as well. So, like, we've just made a show in Larne, and it's really lovely when I go back to Larne now, I wave at people because I've got to know the people of that township. And it's sort of everyone's responsibility in the organisation to go and meet people and go and work out the coffee shop and say hello and become part of the community that you're working within.
Do you use how do you use data to do that, or do you? I mean, do you measure that?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're trying to do as part of the Nesta funded project, is like working out different ways of collecting data that are a bit more playful, a bit more creative. And then once we've got that data, we can go back and be better at doing that work. But it is about human contact as well. It's about saying hello and buying coffee.
Theatre lovers willing to walk 6 miles up a mountain, that must be a whole diversity thing all in its own. And Paula, just because you work with institutions, is this something that they regularly kind of look at and work on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we again shouldn't be too distracted by the sort of the digital nature of this. I think inclusion is an issue full stop, and you know the way that we ensure that actually everyone feels included and participates within their culture, I think remains as true as it has ever been. And there's no doubt there are issues around inclusion with many of our art forms. I think digital quite usefully brings some of those issues into sharp relief.
But I mean, we'll shift on to the next question, but I think in all of the cases of the evidence you've just been showing, you think at the start, you're thinking about the projects you're doing, your fairies flying around, they are thinking differently about the kind of people they might be reaching. So let's go. How can we stop ideas and work being misused? Misuse is an interesting thought, because when you were talking about Shakespeare earlier on, there is that idea that there's a one text which can't be misused, and that is part of our problem. In film, we have this all the time, the idea of the auteur, whose work can't be messed around with.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe we need some. Maybe we need some messing around. Maybe that's.
Yeah, I think it does get a bit messed around, which is a good thing. I think that if you're talking about the gatekeeper, I'm not too sure I'm going to answer this question right, so forgive me if I don't. But if we're looking at ideas in a gatekeeper sense, that was my idea, I want to do that and I want to hold on to that, I think that issue and debate has been around for a very, very long time. I think what the networked world does and is allow people to put ideas out there, and we realise that lots of people have similar ideas. Really, it's about the appropriation of it and what you do with it. Keeping it in a locked box, it's a bit like, will that be an idea anymore? So I think it's about culture of respect, culture of understanding, a culture of accreditation, and we are quite obsessed in our sectors about that. And I think rights around ownership of certain materials that have been crafted and made, that debate should remain, and we need to keep an openness about that, so we understand the value for people.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that front? Paul, you always got thoughts.
Yeah, I would do. Sorry. I mean, I have some fairly strong views about this. Anyone who knows my background knows that I have worked a lot in copyright reform and activism, and work with Creative Commons. But I think specifically the thing that I would really want us to think about in the context of the network in particular is actually who owns it. And I'm particularly thinking about public funded cultural organisations and institutions, because I think one of the challenges that we really, it's not even a challenge, one of the opportunities that we have is to actually really think about the return on investment that the public get from investing in our big art cultural institutions, our big cultural institutions. And the network really gives us the opportunity to be much, much more fulsome in the return that we give them on that investment. And so, you know, I really would encourage us to be much more radical in the way that we think about the public's capacity to engage, reuse, and even misuse those publicly funded ideas and assets. So perhaps a slightly more radical
I think the audience cut of films, I could think of quite a few that would be considerable improvements on the original. Have we got a live question just while I can't actually see, so I know there's people out there in a roundabout way. Let's I presume everyone's using Twitter now, which is great. It's a great way of asking questions. Have we got another one coming up? To answer all. Yeah, is it good to switch digital off? Is actually, Catherine, I think you kind of talked. I'm really interested, when you're going up a mountain and you're doing all of these things,
yeah.
You're right, the ritual becomes quite complicated, because there must be quite a lot of times where you're kind of asking people in a community way to make the rules up as they're there. I mean, I don't know what you do when you're surrounded by sheep. You shush them. But it's that idea of how do we create a digital rituals? When is it right? When is it right? When do you think about turning things off?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like I said when I was talking about the Mamettes, it's okay to sort of have early conversations with the creative team and then decide that actually the best digital strategy is no digital. That's completely valid. That's not you've not got to shoehorn digital into everything. That'd be a terrible thing to do.
But not. I think it would be awful if we did. Yeah. But you've got to. What you've got to accept is that we just got a lot of tools available to us and a lot of new possibilities, and we're experimenting with that. And if we, as a cultural institution, if we don't experiment with that, we will be left behind, and that's really important. And it's not about an either-or, and I think Paula was saying that it's not an either-or. We're not about that. We're not homogenising the cultural experience that you're going to have. What we want to do is be creating experiences that are relevant to today.
Paul, there was a big thing around transmedia for a long time. There was the idea there was a new art form called transmedia, which seemed to be doing lots of different things. And there was almost a feeling like you had to have a game and you had to have something. Is that culture changing? Is there, perhaps because it didn't work really, there aren't all that many great transmedia projects?
So I will respond to that last point first,
yeah, please do.
In defence of, which is I think it's still really early days. I do firmly believe that we're still at the point where we're trying to understand, for example, what television is, and all we can imagine at the moment is to put radio on it. I think we've still got such a long way to go around that. But I think, when this idea of a sort of a unique or a new art form, I really have mixed feelings about it. I do definitely think that there is a modality that is unique to the network. I think the idea that there is art that is of the network as opposed to on the network is true. But I think, as I say, I think we have a long way to go before we really, really understand what that looks like. And I think it's because for many of us, even those so-called born digital, the complexity of the network and the way that it fundamentally changes the way that we think about ourselves in relationship to each other, I think we're absolutely scraping the surface of that.
No, and that's a really important point that I think all three of you have kind of made, is this is kind of evolving and emerging from the way that audiences are behaving, and it's not a bunch of techies thinking of new ways of doing things and this is the new art. Actually, the way that art and expression is working is kind of organically kind of working out back from the audience, at least the stuff that works. I'm not sure, Alex, I don't know who Alex is, but he's asking lots of intelligent questions here. But this, I don't really understand this one, I must say. Who is Alex? Come on, Alex, tell us what you meant by this question. Right, okay, I think I've got your point here, which we needed a microphone for that, but it's okay. I think the point you're making is we start from the earliest possible age. We have a very fixed idea, and Shakespeare is quite a good example here. We learn and we're told to revere things in a certain kind of way. I always like it whenever you ask someone to recite anything of Shakespeare, even if like me from Birmingham, they still end up with our Shakespearean accent. They always put on to be or not. So, and it's that kind of feeling that there is a way of, the text is somehow still something that can't be touched. And actually, we've got to kind of re-educate at the end of an education system that tries to narrow your thinking. Anyone got any thoughts on that? You must have thoughts on that.
I mean, it's changing. There's some fantastic work that's done by a research group led by Mimi Ito, which is really looking at the way that people are now actually learning, as opposed to the way that we think people learn. And the thing that they've really focused on is how has the network changed the way that people actually learn. And the thing that very strongly is coming out of that work is many of the things that I identified as being affordances of the network. So it's highly collaborative. We learn from each other. It should be no kind of big news, but if you look in a classroom context or an institutional context, the idea that actually I would talk to the person sitting next to me, that's cheating. Or it's disruptive, or we attach many labels to it. So there is some great work out there that is really starting to help us understand that the way that we actually learn, the way that we actually are now developing our ideas and thinking about ideas, are very much a reflection of those affordances of the network. Now, there's a whole other school of thought to which I have some sympathy with, that's process where we fed children in one end and hoped that adults came out the end of the production line fully formed. That was sort of a weird blip, if you like, in the way that we actually learn. So I think we have a challenge. I think institutions really struggle with this idea of the partial, the early idea, but there is change.
I think there is. Hiding away from all of this is that idea that there is. This came out yesterday. We're talking about a national culture. Are there texts that actually do matter? And there's a great piece of. I remember Nicholas Negroponte. There's a name going back 20 years ago, who wrote, "You could live in the kind of 50s if you wanted to. You could choose to have an entirely personal culture with a personal religion, and you don't have to interact in any way with the people around you." That idea of Shakespeare or national theatre companies as being actually important institutions, and that actually it's part of our national cohesion, is that dying, or is that actually still retaining its importance?
Thanks. I think, well, 2016 is going to be a seminal year for Shakespeare. It's the 400th anniversary of his death, and hopefully we're going to be bringing together a huge amount of activity that highlights that and shows that cultural institutions can work alongside companies from around the world. We'll set off our Open Stages programme, which is amateurs around the country, and that's a phenomenal project that will be a genuine collaboration. So I think it's more about the institutions to continue need to just keep that relationship with the world that they exist up in the air, and when they close their doors, that's probably when it's the most dangerous time. And so I think that's really the answer to it. I think it's a bigger issue, but we did just to answer in a more practical sense, we for the World Shakespeare Festival in 2012 we did a digital piece called Banquo. It was part of the 2012 Cultural Olympiad, and we looked at creating a data aggregator that searched for references of Shakespeare through Twitter, Flickr and eBay, and every day showed a data visualization of what the world of Shakespeare online looks like. And that was an institution not projecting what it was doing with Shakespeare. What that was doing was an institution asking the question what the world was doing with Shakespeare online, through social, through visual, and through, interestingly on eBay, through trade and how Shakespeare is traded. So I think we have to ask the right questions, and we have to involve as many people as possible is the answer. We don't always get it right, but humans don't always get it right, and that's important. And we must keep the bar high on how we are asking that question.
Okay, I'm really, so that's a great way to actually end the discussion anyway, but it's one that I think is going to go on during the day, really fascinating. I think the point that's just being made there has kind of come through. Is it a marketing tool, which is really about what's this about? And maybe it's a good way of summing up, is what we're looking at with this social media ways of adding marketing and access to already existing cultural work, or is it actually something which is more profound than that? I think what we've seen in the RSC and the National Theatre of Wales are things which change the relationship and work on the relationship that's different between people and content, and it tries as much as possible, and I think as Paul is saying, this is an evolving area. It tries to understand the way that people interact with the media anyway, the media they're using, and they're finding the right tools to tell the right stories in the right kind of ways. And I think the fact that all these things are happening, that there's an understanding of the difference with this culture that we've heard on this panel, I think offers that way forward. If we can think that way as the starting point, and then start seeing tools as the means to express and tell stories in the way you're doing, I think we've got a lot to be hopeful for. So first of all, thanks to the panel. Open clap. That's a ritual. You've got a 10-minute break coming back at 10:15. Just quickly, at lunchtime, there's a kind of dance, multimedia thing called, by someone called Take a Box, called Please Switch on Your Mobile Phone. Sounds a great performance. Apparently you can drop in and out, but that's over the lunch period. And we'll give you more details of that during the next break. The Arwen Lounge, there is currently internet service providers and Cardiff City Council showing lots of innovation, and there's money to be made there apparently. Apparently there's £3,000 sitting around for if you know how to work with those companies, there's lots of internet service companies talking about different kind of grants, different kind of projects. So you might find it profitable as well as interesting. So enjoy your break. Back here at 10:15. Thank you.
There's gold. That's gold.
Thank you so much.
That was great. I'd love to see you again.
Lovely.
Okay, the gentlemen, we can grab our seats. Okay, just a few announcements just to kick off. Again, because it works really well. If you want to send if you've got questions, use the Twitter. I believe we'll have the hashtag up there in a moment. That will give you. Let's keep those coming. I think it's a really interesting and useful way to get to generate discussion anyway, and it's a bit quicker than microphones going around. And also, I can't see you. But if you have a live question, wave. Second thing is, at lunchtime, just a reminder, I've got a bit more information now. It's in the Victor Selby room. It's intriguingly, Take a Box is a dance performance using mobile phones. Who knew? It's a drop-in thing anyway, so it sounds like a really interesting opportunity. And we'll talk a bit more about a network this evening at 6 o'clock. But that sounds like it might involve alcohol, so we can talk about that later on. And if anyone will go to the Owen Lounge, that would be great at some time after this session. They'll be there at lunchtime as well. Okay, next session, we come in. It kind of follows on a little from the last discussion. We've not used very much jargon, I think, which has been quite good. But if you're going to use jargon, alliterative punning jargon has got to work. So haptic hats, I have no idea what a haptic hat might be, but it's an intriguing idea anyway. But again, I think we're talking here about different ways of interacting and collaborating with audiences. Now, what we're going to have is a panel discussion at the end of this, and I'll keep those questions coming in. But we're going to start with Victoria Tillotson, who's going to give us a presentation first. The rest will be a discussion. She's at Pervasive Media Studio, which is part of Watershed in Bristol, which still does the most fantastic things. And one of those institutions that I think has embraced very strongly new ways of dealing with their audiences. So, Victoria.
Okay, so as you know, this session's about the role of the producer, the skills and expertise that we bring to the projects, and the role that we play in translating collaboration and ideas into reality. I've been invited to share a short introductory talk with you, in which I'll explain a little bit about how we facilitate creative collaboration at Watershed, which is a culture and technology centre in Bristol, and some of the quiet measures we employ to make things happen. This will then lead into a panel discussion with the other fantastic producers here, so Ali John, Katrin Ramasut and David Massey, where we'll learn more about their work and approach. Because to be honest, I can tell you about Watershed's approach, which I'm going to focus on more in this presentation, but we all have our kind of own way of doing this stuff, and these guys will bring some fantastic extra things to that debate. So, producers have existed in industries for decades, actually. However, it's only really in the last few years, particularly spurred on by Jerwood's publication of The Producers, Alchemists of the Impossible, that we've witnessed an identification of the role of the creative or digital producer in the arts, which I would roughly define as people who make brilliant things happen. So I'm a producer at Watershed, and a large part of my role involves the creation of collaborative spaces. So these spaces are designed to support and nurture the brilliant people and communities that reside within them. So what do I mean by that? Well, collaborative spaces can be physical or conceptual, exist on and offline, and often overlap with each other. An example of a physical space would be Watershed's Pervasive Media Studio, which is a space inside Watershed's building that brings together an active network of over 150 artists, creative companies, technologists, scientists, and academics to work on new and emerging ideas. Within this infrastructure, conceptual spaces are the residencies, labs, and development programs that we produce there. Our spaces purposefully put art and artists alongside agencies and scientists under our founding principles of generosity and interruptibility in order to encourage cross-pollination, sharing and bettering of ideas. I should also add that the Pervasive Media Studio is a formal partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England and the University of Bristol, so as such is a massive collaboration in itself. So by creating these environments, open places where people from different perspectives can meet to exchange ideas, Watershed as an organisation enables creative collaboration. It's also important to note that we are ideas-led. We focus on helping practitioners realise quality experiences rather than being tech-obsessed or focusing on the latest gimmicks. I've picked out one project case study to illustrate our methods and to also show the value that our work can bring to practitioners and audiences. The project I've chosen was supported by REACT, which is a development programme that funds collaborations between arts and humanities researchers and creative companies. It's supported by the AHRC, the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and it's a collaboration between the University of the West of England, Watershed, and the Universities of Bath, Bristol, Exeter, and Cardiff. So, over here. Okay. In 2012, historian Steve Poole, Bath's Holborn Museum, and experienced architect Splash and Ripple were commissioned to develop Ghosts in the Garden, a new experience for the Holborn Museum Sydney Gardens that would connect contemporary visitors to the history of the gardens and the people that used to populate that space. Working together, they populated the gardens with a number of interactive Georgian ghosts, which were drawn from all social classes and modelled as far as possible upon historically researched real characters, built through careful archival research. It was part game, part story, part immersive soundscape. Visitors were able to interact with the ghosts using a time radio. The experience therefore allowed visitors to learn about real histories whilst being offered a totally new way to explore the gardens. So they'd go around the gardens with this box that you can see in this picture and use that to tune into voices from the past. So why did this collaboration work? So the Holborn Museum is a beautiful Georgian building in the centre of Bath. Sydney Gardens spreads out behind it, but most of the original pleasure garden tropes, such as swing boats, a labyrinth, and an elaborate cosmorama, are all gone. This collaboration enabled the museum to take its audiences on an epic journey of rediscovery and reconnect them with this past in a really interesting way. Dr. Steve Poole, you can just see him on the edge of this picture here. He's based at the University of the West of England. He knows a huge amount about local history clubs and things like that. So this project really brought his research to life, sharing it in a way that he couldn't have done on his own. Splash and Ripple are architects of extraordinary experiences. Previous to this project, they had created large-scale street games, but had always based on fictional stories. This enabled them to approach their work in a whole new way, creating a real-life experience steeped in facts. They've gone on to create ever more fantastical experiences since this one. The latest, actually, which is just launched recently, Suffolk's Bodiam Castle, which they've done in collaboration with the National Trust, enables visitors to take these huge medieval horns around the castle and put them up to the walls and capture the echoes of stories of people past that are trapped in the walls there. So this collaboration with Ghosts in the Garden really worked, but there were various reasons why such a rich dialogue were created, including some of the things that we did as producers to avoid collaborative trip hazards. So I was just going to run through a few of what those things are. So, creating a flexible space for play in which anything can happen. The structure of the REACT programme, and in fact a lot of the other programmes that we run at Watershed, create neutral, flexible spaces in which, in this case, the three partners could meet to research and develop their ideas. We're never didactic about the outcomes, which leaves everyone free to explore, make discoveries, and form their own outcomes through the process. We look for mutuality, so this collaboration brought value to everybody involved. From my experience, projects that bring in technologists as service providers, treating them as coding monkeys there to serve, are often less interesting and successful, as dialogue tends to centre around reaching the fastest and most cost-effective conclusion, rather than approaching problems and ideas in a more exploratory way. I think exploration enables more unexpected things to emerge. Everyone had creative freedom. All the partners had equal freedom to be creative within this project's development. I think there's also an inherent problem in categorizing people in camps of, oh, they're the creative practitioner, they're the venue, they're the academic, they're the technologist, because everyone can be creative and everyone can come up with ideas unexpectedly. So don't shut down opportunities by creating role barriers. Learning languages. So everyone had the patience to learn each other's languages. By the end of this particular project, Steve Poole was as comfortable talking about user experience as Splash and Ripple were about local histories. Sometimes language can be baffling, but I always think don't be afraid to put your hand up if something doesn't make sense, because often it will run both ways. Make things fast, test early and often, which does resonate with some of the things that were said in this morning's presentations, actually. At the studio, we do always encourage people to be open with ideas, make things fast. Signed up to this process of working. This enabled them to move through a number of ideas very quickly and work out what would be the most appropriate for delivery of the experience. And they were working with audience members through that process, so getting continual feedback from them about how they felt about the experience. But I think agreeing how you're going to work from the outset is hugely important. As a producer, I always also encourage people to be kind of clear about timescales and punctuate any development period with lots of these testing events. Don't get carried away with technology. To audiences, this was a time radio enabling them to hear voices from the past. To Splash and Ripple, it was an iPhone in a box. They tried lots of ideas, but in the end, the iPhone actually housed all of the sensors they needed to make this experience happen. So why reinvent the wheel? I think not getting carried away with the technology is really important. It's just another material, and what you're actually doing is making something that's appropriate for your idea rather than something that's all singing and dancing. And sometimes smoke and mirrors, or what we like to call a Wizard of Oz approach, will do the job just as well. You don't always need technology. Conversations are important. From the outset, we factored in time for conversations. This included conversations with the project team, between React to the project team, conversations with the wider studio community. This is super important to help clarify and think through ideas and move things forward. Listen to your audience. Splash and Ripple made a few different versions of the box before settling on the final design. Throughout this process, they were in constant dialogue with the studio community and other people who were kind of regular visitors to the Holborn, who helped them see things in slightly different ways. So go in prepared to be responsive. Being happy to change direction and make it up as you go along are really important. And enjoy yourself and keep an open mind. When you're in the middle of the project, I think you're bound to hit rock bottom. I swear it always happens in everything that we do. But don't fret. I think it can be easy to lose sight of why you were passionate about the idea in the first place. But keep the faith and you'll always pop out the other end with something wonderful. So, just a little bit more about producers. I mean, I believe that producers are vital because they help people interrogate thinking, take risks, scale ambitions, and explore the value in ideas. And all those points that I just listed, we make sure that they happen. I was thinking about how to describe the role of the producer in a bit more detail and came to the conclusion that it's a bit like being a cross between a head teacher, a dinner lady or dinner person, a football enthusiast and a magician. And this is why. Okay. So we keep everything running, we manage the budgets, we spot opportunities, and we look after the governors. We create safe spaces to play, we suggest games, we watch the time, we encourage cliques to play together, We mediate, we make sure everyone is fed, and we're always on hand to fix Gray's knees. We are our project's biggest fans. We track the league tables, we write reviews, we get people talking about it. We're at all the events, we wear the merch, and we sing the theme tunes. And most importantly, whatever happens, we can usually work some kind of magic, and we're always prepared to pull a rabbit from a hat. So there's a short documentary about ghosts in the garden, which I actually thought it would be nice to show you, just because, you know, I can explain to you, but it's quite nice to see the people who made it talking about it.
What Ghosts in the Garden has been about is about place, actually. It's about a distinct place, a particular place. Of course it's about history, and of course it's about pleasure gardens, but it's also about a park that people in this area walk in all the time without necessarily thinking about who's walked here before. So to uncover some real history, to think about the discipline of how we discover the real histories, how we put people from the past back into the land on which we walk, I think that's just such a valuable, that's so much better than making it up.
What we're hoping is that as they have this kind of physical connection to the past and they walk around and they're listening into stuff, it's going to paint the picture of what was going on here. And it was a busy, bustling place. There were all kinds of things happening. So we kind of want people to sort of go away with that experience.
Hello. Let's stay in one place. One moment. I shall do it. Excellent. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is John Joseph Merlin, inventor, maker of musical instruments, and creator of amazing mechanisms.
The experience is powered by a game mechanic in the form of a choose-your-own-adventure scenario. So you start at the first scene, and you're given a couple of choices, and you need to decide what you're going to do. And there's some kind of jeopardy there, or some kind of decision about who you're going to trust.
You should either head over to the wonderful Cosmorama with Mr. Gwreiddiol, or walk up the hill to the swings to see if anyone's lurking.
The really unique thing about what we've done here is to allow a sort of a fictive representation of a pleasure ground to dominate the project, but a fictive representation that's thoroughly informed by real historical research. When I look at projects of a similar kind elsewhere in the country, it always seems to me that's not what we've got. Neither has this been a sort of a digital guidebook, because we didn't want to do that either. We wanted it to be much more involving and exciting.
So they get given one of these, which is the special listening device. And people go out and take the objects with them and listen into what's happening in different places.
I mean, these are the only surviving pleasure gardens, but nothing from the pleasure gardens survives. I mean, the labyrinth's gone, all the excitements are not there, and I think and hope what this sort of experience gives a sense of is quite what used to happen, the life there used to be, of lights and fireworks and illuminations and labyrinths and swings and all the rest of it. And so I hope they get a sense of the sort of layers of history through where we are.
My delivery method is either through lecture, seminar, presentation, or through book or learned article. So I can talk to public audiences that way, but it's very kind of one way. But this, of course, is an entirely different thing. We're allowing the public, more or less, to kind of lead their own, find their own way through the research. So these are just new ways of working for me. These are new kinds of outcome, and I've had to listen to people from other disciplines about what will work and what won't work, and I'm just not used to this. But I think I've done quite well, really.
I think that we've done it. I think people are coming back and they're talking about how they feel about the space, and they're using language about imagining what it was like, and they're saying it's evocative, that the soundscape made them imagine what it was like when it was a pleasure garden, and that was exactly what we were trying to achieve.
Oh, you still here? Get along and follow Mr. Gwreiddiol to the Cosmorama, or find out if there are any beggars by the swings. Hurry!
Thank you.
Okay, we've got our panel now. Victoria's kindly going to join us. And with different experiences that they will describe, I think, first. Maybe we'll kick off with Catherine, I think from IEI Productions that we work with at the at Film Cymru Wales on American Interior is the one. I think you've got a little bit to show. Have we got a little clip trailer? Let's just have a quick look at this. Okay, if you haven't seen it, great album, great film. You must get, but maybe Catherine, what we'll do, we'll just give a little background on what it is you did on this project and maybe other projects you think are relevant, and then we'll go along the panel and then we'll have a general discussion. So, Kat, maybe we could just start with you.
So I was the producer of this multi-platform project, which grew and grew. From our last project, film, which was Separado. We took the learning from that and decided that this needed to be a project rather than just a film. So there's a film, book, an app, an album, and a website as well that doesn't get mentioned, but that was another thing on top to produce. And yeah, we've had lots of support from S4C, Film Agency for Wales, in order to make it happen, and the project was launched in May.
And just give us a little bit of background on what you personally were involved in, what your company were involved with doing. Which bits did you make, and how did you come to make it in the way that you made it?
Well, we produced the film, and when we were financing the film, Griff also got a book deal with Penguin to write the book of American Interior, and then Penguin wanted to do something more experimental than just an e-book, so they decided that they'd like to create an app which was more immersive way of telling the story, but using all the multimedia that we'd collected together from, you know, all the data that we had from filming film. So we had all extra footage and all the extra content that went into the app, and then all the research that we did for the film and all the academic research that Griff did went into the book, and then he composed a sonic soundscape for the film as well. So the album tells the story, and that's the soundtrack to the film.
So it kind of emerged from the different bits. You didn't start out thinking this is going to be a project.
Well, we knew we wanted to do the album was going to be the next soundtrack in the film, but the book and the app were additionals. And basically I led all those people through the process. So I've been heavily involved across everything and leading everyone and bringing everyone together, because it's not cross-financed as a project, but it's cross-marketed, so we've all benefited from each other and actually getting everyone together and agreeing on copyright issues and rights, etc., and also then how we were going to launch the film and get it out there to an audience. I've led all those parties, basically.
But I think it's a really interesting one when we go through, and I suspect if you haven't tweeted your questions already, one of the things that will come up is about the effort and returns for these various things and how these different cross-media elements kind of fit together, because it is a project that kind of emerged and grew in quite an interesting way, and I think it's a very useful conversation to have. Let's move on to Alison John at Yellow Brick, which you do call yourself a creative marketing agency, but actually it's a lot more than that. And I think in terms of if you haven't got a chance to have a look at some of the projects, it's well worth looking up online. There's some very immersive kind of fresh ideas in there. Maybe you could run us through a few of your projects.
Yeah, so I guess we decided to call ourselves a marketing agency first and foremost because that's what people understand. But I guess, as you've just said, we're a bit more than that. I guess if I had to say it simply, we tell stories, and we do that through many different ways. We could use digital, we could use physical events, and lots of other different things. We are very much influenced by theatre, we're very much influenced by film and design, but ultimately it's about the experience of the audience or the user. So we're based in Cardiff Bay, so we're literally just around the corner from here, and we're a very new company, so we're sort of still finding our way through the murky waters of what digital is and what it can be, and how that also enables or enhances either a physical event or you know, how we can tell stories using that medium. We are 2 years old, so yeah, we had our birthday in June, which, yay. So I guess the projects that we do experiment with how we can tell a story. So we exist in two ways. We have client work and commissions, and then we also produce our own work quite selfishly because we like to. And we do find that the work that we produce ourselves is a massive learning for the input that we can put into our client work as well. So just to give an example of some of the stuff that we have done, we've worked with WNO, David, on a project that was called I Am Tudor, and this was a digital experience for their main season of operas last year. And they came to us because they wanted to do something within the digital sphere, but we weren't quite sure what that would be or could be. So we looked at the world initially of the Tudor season of operas and kind of took from that major themes. And I guess the key is, rather than looking at retelling the story on a digital platform, it's about building an experience on that digital platform. So we created basically an interactive online test that took you into that world. So we started with the premise of how would today's society look like if the Tudors came back into power. So it was kind of very sort of drawn on the influences of the design of the opera, very Lynchian, very, I guess, Orwellian in some respects as well. And people could basically go online and have a 10-minute interaction with this platform that we'd created. And what we're really interested in is sort of, I guess we describe them as interventions, how the digital can then pop out into the physical world. So for example, at one point the character that you interact with asks for your telephone number because she wants to tell you a secret. So as soon as you sort of hit send on that part of the experience, your mobile phone rings and she's on the end of the phone. So it's, I guess, really essentially about playing and just pushing what can be possible within the digital realm or physical realms.
And just quickly, where did you come from to get to this? What made you decide this was what you wanted to do?
Oh, I'm 33, and like 2 years ago, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. My background's in theatre. I trained as an actress. I did drama and English at university, and I kind of went on this massive journey of, I guess, self-discovery, and being a jack of all trades pretty much for 10 years and just doing lots and lots of different things. So performing, directing. I moved on to event management and worked with lots of different companies who work within sort of the festival environment, work within small scale events, eventually finding myself working for a marketing company in Cardiff, really random, to then sort of being working with a marketing company that put on the Getting Welsh Business Online. So I was project manager for Google's Getting Welsh Business Online thing that happened 2 years ago. So it's been like a massive, crazy journey for me, and then essentially then discovering what I can do with the massive skill set that I have, and putting it into something that I enjoy first and foremost. And hence yw'r sort of was created with myself and 2 others, and we were really interested in immersive experiences, digital influences, and telling stories.
Okay, sounds interesting. And David, you've already had a little bit of introduction from the Welsh National Opera. You've all got boring job titles. Yesterday, everyone was called, what was it, I can't even say it. That's how good it is. But you need some fancier names. All this digital stuff's rubbish. Think of something. There's a guy I saw.
Get rid of the word digital.
Yeah, get rid of that.
Yeah.
There's I did an interview with someone who's just had the word genius on his business card. I always thought you've got to be quite good to do that, to be honest. But David, as you are good, but Welsh National Opera, give us a bit of another, as we were talking about the last session, institutions based in the experience economy already. So maybe give us an idea of where you've been working.
Yeah, so basically I look after the main website, yw'r.org.uk, and my job is I would say quite unique actually for an arts institution in that I actually curate content as well as create stuff myself. So I basically work with a pool of producers or creative producers to create content that again tells stories that come out of the company, stories that we'd like to kind of maybe shape differently for the web, a different form of narrative that will be happening on the stage of our productions. And I'm very much embedded within the marketing team. So people come to me and say, basically, we want some stuff made. We want to reach this audience. How can we do it digitally? Seeing what they were doing with Revelry, we really wanted to aim our Tudors productions to a younger audience, 25 plus, an arts eclectic, urban arts eclectic audience, which that's what the Arts Council call them. And basically, it's people that don't, these group of people don't respond to traditional marketing forms. So we thought that by creating this world online, that you could also share online with people was really kind of interesting to create another kind of form of narrative, really. And also something that Ali didn't mention, which I think was also important, I think that the panel touched on this morning, is that the live aspect is also really important to this. And we did do a live procession through Cardiff City with the Tudor court, to kind of, to get people interested in I Am Tudor as a product, which I think worked really well, and it went hand in hand with the project. So yeah, I think the live aspect is also really kind of important.
But while we stick up any tweets that we've got, there is an important point that I think comes through yours, maybe this is different from Victoria's to an extent, is how much of it starts with there's the main thing, and then this is marketing and stuff around the edge. So there's a film, and we want some extra things to get people engaged. How much is this changing things profoundly in ways that perhaps change the... Maybe start with you, David, and then work back.
That's a good question. I'm just trying to think how I can answer that. I think that basically it's making institutions look in a different way. We're thinking much more creatively now about how we create content. I think that it's, in terms of, as was touched on this morning, digital has always been very much an add-on, and I think that things are definitely changing in my organisation, where we're definitely thinking that, you know, how it can be very much integral, and you need to kind of, me in my position, I'm very much working much closer now with our youth and community department, for example. We do a lot of projects, and being there right from the outset when the project is conceived and how digital can feed into that is really important. And I think I've been there for 5 years now, and I've seen a real shift in that happening, which I think is...
And is that driven by the fact that it increases access to audiences, it increases that, maybe different kinds of people? Is that the core of...
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And it's, you know, at the end of the day, there's the live experience. I mean, I'd never, before I'd actually joined the company, I'd never been to an opera. So, and I think that getting people to kind of tap on the door of that, if we can do that through digital, I think would be a really successful thing. It's quite hard to kind of encompass that fantastic experience, live experience, in digital in many ways. But if you can get certain people's interests, if their avenue is kind of, or their route in is different, and it's through digital, I think that's a really positive thing.
Okay, so I can see that. Alison, from your point of view, do clients now come to you, because we've looked at these tools that we're talking about here, do they come to you with, here's what we're already doing, can you do something digital around the edge of it, or are you getting to the stage where people are coming to you with interesting thoughts at the start and saying, look, how can we make this more interesting? Where does it start?
I guess it kind of varies, but most often people just come to us with maybe the seed of an idea or something that they already have in existence. And you know, it's kind of really interesting, the process that we go through with them. You know, first and foremost is how do we tell this story? You know, it's not necessarily about, okay, how can we add digital onto this thing? It's more about, okay, how can we extend this story? And what's the best ways to do that? Looking at their existing audiences, looking at potential new audiences, and how we can kind of, I guess, capture their imaginations. And then kind of working through a process of understanding those assets and what we can do to add to that. So I think it is kind of, for me, maybe there is ever increasingly a blur between marketing and production, and I think they're essentially the same thing, and I think they need to be that to kind of move forward into this kind of, I guess, new age. And I think people have still work within an old culture of this is marketing and this is production, when they kind of need to be communicating together and talking to each other about what they can do together to produce something that is one thing.
But people are more open to that idea now. They're coming to you at an early stage,
yes,
where they're thinking about developing that. I mean, that's quite promising, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think so, and I think particularly with, you know, not just digital, but with anything, you know, with collaborations, it's just really important to start those conversations really early on, because that's what a true collaboration is. It's kind of no good coming with, you know, this idea and we kind of want a digital element to it, so, you know, what can you do to add to it? Because, you know, essentially, as the previous speakers this morning sort of said, it kind of needs to be not just digital and it's a separate thing, it needs to be something that is another tool that we can use or not use, dependent on each individual project and the aim of that project and the artistic vision of that project, and also, more importantly, you know, the audiences and what experience they're going to have of that.
Right. And Kat, from your point of view with the American interior, I mean, it's slightly different, because the album and the film. I mean, Griff is primarily known as a musician, although Separado is another great film. But that feeling of where this other stuff fits in, you always worry that about how the book and the film, and what's the priority? How does marketing work across them all? Are these just different facets of the same work, or are
last time from Separado, a bunch of assets that never got used and that we didn't. Separado came out before Twitter really got going and Instagram, so we learned from that we needed to collect all the assets that we had. So that's all the pictures that all the crews were taking as we were going around on this 6-week tour of America, all the stills, not all the footage, all the audio, all the outtakes, that we were aware that we had to collect all these assets and then that we would have them to use. We didn't know exactly what we were going to do with them all, but we knew that we had them there. Obviously, we planned for a couple of videos. We thought, okay, there's going to be an album, so okay, we have to think about how we're going to shoot the videos in amongst everything else, and then how the interviews are going to be used, because they didn't even make it into the film. Most of them didn't make it into the films, but the app came along then, so that was our opportunity. And then afterwards, after we created our platforms, then we had to think about the marketing of it and the material, and then what we had.
And that's the big core change, because what you're talking about, you were collecting materials instinctively knowing that at various points you might find ways to use it. Yeah. And it seems to me it's the stage at which you start, which all of you are saying is important, because so many of the projects, let's say in the film world and elsewhere, you have a finished product and then you try and work out how to stick some digital marketing on the end. And it seems to me all of you were talking about starting at the beginning, at the earliest stages, and working out the materials you collect, the way that you think has to be thought through right from the very start of and conception of the project.
I mean, it's the role of the producer to be this, like you say, jack of all trades, and think of everything before you even set out the marketing, the press, the social media, and it's just like it's a big job. We've even the website that we've created now is we're diversifying into becoming an independent distributor as well. So I've now become a retailer, which is like yet another bunch of skills that I've had to learn about.
We'll come back, I think, a little bit. I think one of the questions may come up to the idea of the amount of skills and energy you have to put in. Let's just go through some of the stuff we've got here. Openness, I'm not 100% sure what you meant by openness, whoever think ARC is. If what the reference is to is what we were talking about yesterday, that you've got closed kind of text, the stuff that's the way that there's the rights and the things that we hold on to as businesses, and then you can play around with some stuff on the edge. Is that, that's probably not just Wales, but is Wales open enough in terms of your access to the rights and the ability to do things? I guess you're not in Wales, Victoria.
I actually live in Cardiff.
Oh, there we go. Well, you'll tell me, in terms of collaboration, have we got the budgets here? Have we got the skills here? Have we got the infrastructure here that really works?
But I also read that as an attitude.
Yeah.
Having an open attitude is actually the key thing that you need. And I think, is Wales open? Is a massive question. And I think that in the sense is the wrong question, as is, is, I don't know, BBC open, is Mostyn open, is anywhere open? I think what you have to look for is those individuals that reside in all of these places, because there is open people within kind of bigger structures everywhere. And it's like making connections with those people is how you make things happen, because they work on it from the inside.
I think we've had a lot of that. I mean, you kind of think when you're talking through that it's a soft thing, but actually increasingly the state of mind seems to be the bit that is most in need of change. But you're all working in this kind of field. Is that state of, I mean, I think it's a very, very good way of looking at it. Is that the initial state of mind and openness to the ideas actually there in place, or do you find it still quite a lot of effort to get these ideas across to people, particularly institutions perhaps?
Obviously, I like to think that we're very open in our organisation. I do think we do sometimes when people see projects, I think it's very hard for people to think objectively about them and how it works for a specific audience. And we just have to remind certain people that it's not actually for them. So some of this creative stuff that we're producing. So there's that aspect of it. But I think generally, as an organisation, I think we're becoming more and more open to these kind of things.
It's interesting just from you. I mean, the organisation can be open in terms of you wanting to do this. It is one where, when we say we need to be in touch with our audiences, there's a great piece of film work where they were saying how we're going to get 16-year-olds in cinemas, but as part of the research they showed actually if you were over 40, the last thing you wanted was teenagers in your cinema, and people were actually prepared to pay more money if we didn't have teenagers in the cinema. And I think that's probably with opera. Some of those opera fans probably look at this with a kind of slightly sneery air.
We quite like those young people to come to our.
What do you mean, the under 70s?
Yeah, definitely.
Has anyone else got thoughts on just the state of mind in Wales? Do we think we're getting there?
I think there's, I guess that question for me sort of raises two thoughts. So one is when you do work with institutions and they want something created and they want to take the risk, but then you have these conversations initially and then halfway through the project they panic and then kind of go, oh, actually, no, let's make it for everyone and not just this section of people that we've been producing maybe something for.
Yeah.
You know, that maybe the thought that they'll alienate their existing audiences or alienate somebody, and I think that taking that leap of faith almost is kind of quite scary still, because people are still thinking about how they traditionally make work and produce work. And I think it is sometimes about sort of taking the hand and going, you know, let's try this. And you know what, if it doesn't work in the way that we think it works and it fails, that's great, because do you know what, we've learned something and we've tried something out and we've taken a risk. And that can inform us much more than not doing anything and not trying anything and still, you know, traditionally producing things in some ways.
Yeah.
And then I guess the second way I've sort of read that, and I've probably read it wrong, is maybe openness to learning from others and their practices. And collaborating with people that you wouldn't normally work with, you know. So, you know, how can we, you know, throw theatre in with a technologist? What will come out the other end? So really pushing your kind of, I guess, routine or your kind of way of working, which can be quite blinkered. You know, can you be open to how somebody else and learn from them how they work through things? That's really valuable.
I think we may come back in other later on when we've gone through this. I think there is who is the other audience we're talking about here. I was reminded when we were talking earlier about core audiences of an old Foster's advert. This is a Castlemaine lager advert where the sheep shearers have filled their van up with beer, and someone just says something for the ladies, and they come out with one bottle of sherry and stick it on the back of the van. And it kind of feels a little bit sometimes that the digital stuff is the sweet sherry in this. But who is this audience outside? How do we understand? Let's come back to that. So the next point, the next thing was really about facilities and space. It's not. I mean, is there something in Wales? I think you might. Let's talk about infrastructure quickly. The physical spaces and the stuff to make this happen. You seem to have an opinion about this.
Well, it's just an ongoing battle in Wales and in Cardiff as well. We are not fortunate enough to have a Basic Media Studio. There's not even a creative hub in Wales. I know the council and the Welsh Government have. It's on their agenda, but we don't seem to be getting anywhere. It's great news that BBC Wales HQ is going into the centre of Cardiff, but for small indies like us, where we need a space to come together and talk and have these conversations and be able to discuss and have a dialogue about what we're doing, how I can help them, how they can help us. We don't have that space, and it's creatively hindering Wales, I think, because to go back to the last question, I think there is openness in Wales because Film Agency, S4C, the Welsh Government have been very supportive of what American Interior, even though it's not going to be commercially successful, and they all know that. Obviously, we would like it to make its money back, but it's unlikely. But yeah, everyone has invested because it's an experiment and we're learning and we've got to do it. Otherwise, we don't know how to do it and we're not building that skill set. And there's a huge gap for a creative hub in Wales.
I wonder what that creative hub looks like. Has anyone got, I mean, what is it that's missing? I mean, it's saying there's something missing. We've got a group of people here. What is it, what would you like to see that would actually work, that you could go and make a presentation about?
Well, a building, an area where you can have flexible offices, accommodation. So, you know, when it's me on my own as a production company, it's just be in a small space, but then the possibility to expand into a production where I need, you know, an edit suite and other people in the office, production people. So you can expand and contract depending on the project you're working with. And then literally a space like there is in Bristol where you can sit and just bump into people and walk into their office, and it's about having an open space and an open dialogue, and there's literally no physical space, and there's no, people try it in the digital sense, but it never happens. And you know, as part of the digital producers group, it was good to be all together, but it's still difficult trying to get us all together post that.
I mean, it's not a physical thing, but I think that's what I wanted to get at the digital producers program, which we did in collaboration with NTW and Watershed, was that we would foster this group of people that basically could get together and maybe work on creative projects moving forward together. Also, I kind of, some people have used it as a kind of platform to show a very early developments of projects to get feedback on. I know everyone's been completely nice about stuff, so that's really good. Quite critical. So yeah, so I think for me, yeah, it's really hard not having a physical space, but I think the Digital Producers Lab has been a great opportunity for us to kind of meet other practitioners in Wales to kind of basically get together and when we can, and possibly work on projects together moving forward if we think it's right.
But it's maybe something for government to take out of this thing, but the idea of a physical space, I think what you're suggesting is that it's not everything has to be formal, a place where you can go and actually interact in an ad hoc way, which to an extent happens at Pervasive Media Studio anyway. You can come around and it's that playing around, and that the best ideas may actually come from informal settings where you just happen to be meeting.
It's the chats in the pub, isn't it? Or, you know, it's definitely the social, over a pint or past it. I don't know what you like.
But the need for the creatives to talk to the technologists and the developers and people beyond your realm of knowledge that you need just help with answering questions. You know, it just facilitates learning and creative projects. And you know, Wales needs to make that big technological move forward.
That's really interesting. If only there was a place where there was historic buildings that were lying empty at the moment.
I have no idea where that is.
Can we skip to the next question?
Can I just add,
in
the meantime, Bristol's not that far. We have open studios every Friday, so anyone's welcome to come and join us.
And you choose to live in Cardiff. That's got to be some kind of
I do it every day. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah, the game. This is something we haven't really touched on a lot in terms of storytelling. That at most conferences, when you discuss this, a lot of people come from a games background, and I haven't heard the word story universe yet. That must be the first time ever at a conference like this. But that idea of the games mechanic, the gamification is a horrible word, but that idea of the gaming, you kind of maybe you talked a little about in your projects. There's a kind of playful element, but it's not. Is gaming in anyone's thinking? I'm looking at you. You must. You look like
you know, we beyond some of the work that we create, we do create pervasive street games, which is basically a bunch of people in the streets interacting with lots of wonderful magical things. So it's a kind of a bastardization, I guess, of theatre and game. And I guess game to adults is sometimes a kind of a bit of a dirty word, if I can say that. You know, because they immediately think either kind of video games, or they think that it's for children. And I guess coming from a sort of theatre background, sort of the idea of play is very much instilled in the training that you have, and it's kind of quite interesting with the games that we have created, as in physical games, that people come with very much an open mind, and it just creates a really interesting social interaction. So some of the structures that we've played around with is, say we have an audience of 60 people, we usually separate them into groups of 6, and more often than not you're with people that you don't know, which kind of scares most people. But by the end of the experience, they're like, your best friend. It just sort of engenders this really interesting social froth, which perhaps you wouldn't necessarily have if you go and watch a piece of theatre. You usually sit, everybody's kind of done it now, you're not sitting right next to the person that you don't know, you leave this chair in between. And I think sort of what game mechanics do is it's kind of like a kind of welcoming handshake to a social experience.
Okay, I think it might be worth just putting another point of view, because it's probably not on this panel particularly, but there's a hell of a lot of work in this front around the idea of creating that idea of the story universe with lots of different ways of interacting with people, lots of different ways in. It's worth looking at the work of people like Lance Weiler, for example, if you're not aware of his work, where you can actually have quite strong social kind of thinking, but there's a lot of people, their starting point is gaming, and actually they try and turn that into some kind of real world experience. I just use that as an alternative example. So even if it's not here, I'd say it's worth exploring that a bit more. And there are a hell of a lot of people from that background doing really quite interesting things. Is there any more? Yep. Oh, I think there was a one before that, wasn't there? Oh, it's okay. Okay, it's the commercial success story. I think the money thing we haven't really talked about either. That's another thing that's rather odd coming up. There's a lot of stuff being done here. Where's the money? Where's this going to be? Where am I going to make my riches? You may all have Ferraris outside for all I know. But where does the money fit in? You're doing a hell of a lot of things, but where does this get monetized? Who wants to start with that? Maybe.
I mean, our projects have very much come out of the marketing pot of money, and we're working on a project at the moment, which specifically there's a digital pot of money, so that money is the project that we're working on in development next has come out of that, so yeah, that's where the pot of money comes from, really.
Is that normal for everyone? There's the kind of soft money, public money for specific projects, and I mean, maybe Kat, you can come in here, because part of the problem, and I say this as someone chairing the film fund in Wales, you've got that feeling of we want to be very expansive and open to lots of things, but you're kind of pushed as much as possible into funding in your silo. So here's money for film, here's money for music. There isn't really an underlying economic structure at the moment that says, here's this bigger project that could make money in all kinds of interesting ways. That commercial thinking isn't really in place yet, as far as I can see.
And I think it's difficult as well because, there's still that traditional way of thinking, and people, and this is a very broad sweeping statement, they think digital, they think cheap. It's online, it's on the internet, so it's not going to cost as much. And I think there's a kind of big problem with that, in relation to producing digital work, that, there's a whole lot of work behind that, what you see online. Okay, it's not a physical thing, but it does, cost money, and budgets should be appropriate to that. There's still the producing, there's still the content creation, there's still the thought behind it. So yeah, I think that is something that kind of needs to be thought about, and maybe that is looking at where the budget comes from, and is marketing and production the same thing? So where should the money come for?
And time is
time, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, just to add actually on that, is that actually the films that we produce are all very much in response to what our audience wants. So, for example, we do trailers for upcoming productions. We also do kind of stories around backstage stuff. So we can actually see from that who is kind of buying a ticket after watching a piece of film.
And is that where potentially in the long run the money might be, that actually you have a different kind of relationship with people, that maybe people over a period might be more willing to pay for experiences? I'm thinking of that great piece of research from a few years back that said young people wouldn't pay anything for music, but they were willing to pay, what was then in America, $3 for a ringtone, which is actually just a slice of a piece of music. And it's that feeling that maybe if you create experiences, there are different elements, but we're still trying to find our ways in through quite old-fashioned thinking from us. Is that? Would that
I think
be
there could be some interesting business models, especially around storytelling, and getting some of our core audience, to actually buy any of this kind of material. I think it could work. Not sure what that kind of looks like yet, but
I was reading, we're setting up a platform to distribute the film ourselves on VHX, and apparently most people will buy bonus material. They don't want, because basically they can download the film for free somewhere else, but they will actually purchase the bonus material because it's something that they can't get anywhere else, and they will purchase that. And
that is actually the gaming model in a lot of East Asia. Is actually you get the thing for free and you buy the kits and the other stuff around it. And I guess a lot of apps kind of working on that front as well. Okay, we're going to have to leave it because we've kind of reached lunchtime on this viewpoint. I mean, I think just to wrap up on this session again, I think what we're hearing from Victoria's project is there's a hell of a lot of inventive and interesting ways that media can come together to actually create something which is more than the experience, the single experience. So I thought it was very interesting to hear the guy saying people wander around this place but have got no sense of what it used to be. And I think when you're in Cardiff Docks, when I was here making a film in the 80s, this place was Docklands. This place was quite scary down here, but tons of atmosphere. And now, you know, that sense of that connection with the extent, there's a lot of marketing think on the that's on the edge of projects, but I think increasingly, it's quite positive, as we heard in the earlier session, but I think from David, institutions are increasingly interested in this because they're starting to see results and they're starting to see different kind of people getting involved, and they're beginning to understand the creative potential. And I think that's where Alison's business lies, really, is that exploration of where new ways of connecting with audience, with new tools of all kinds. And with from Kat's point of view, I think the opportunity to actually, as a producer now, to actually find those different ways in, to actually what tends to be much richer content. A film may have all kinds of things around it that are much richer, actually, because the idea, the underlying idea, can be explored in lots of different ways. I think that the two things that come out of this as challenges, apart from the obvious one of that connection with the audience, which is always developing, facilities that I think this idea of a physical space, I think, is becoming really important. And I think we're hearing this all the time now. It used to be that the virtual world, going back to Paula's point earlier on, the virtual world and the real world are one's replacing the other, but actually we behave differently as people within physical spaces. And maybe that opportunity of actually creating a place where we're engaging with each other and bashing around ideas may be a great way and a great piece of investment. So I think we're hearing about that. And of course, the last thing is what we're all talking about, which is all these great ideas are really inspiring, but where's the money? And at some point, when we're looking at new people coming in and some great people coming in, I think there's always that temptation to either take the conservative option of making a film or making a game or whatever, and not doing this. or of finding some other way of expressing your ideas. And the expression of ideas, we always assume that our creative industry is the way that people express ideas, but there's lots of other things that you can do. And I think that's a challenge that I think we need to face, is how do we turn this into something that means something all the time. So first of all, thanks to the panel, again. Secondly, you've got two options. Well, our mobile phone dance epic is happening. I think it would be a great, actually, addition to what we're talking about here. There's something that's actually happening, and that's in the Victor Selvi room as we speak. You can go and find your money up in the, that is promised up there somewhere. There's riches in those internet service providers, if only you know how to talk to them and unlock them. They're up in the Owen Lounge. If you're looking for lunch, there are places downstairs, Fresh and other coffee shops down there, lots of places to eat. And this afternoon when we come back, we're coming back to what will be a bit of performance art, actually a great way of showing rather than telling from some ability, and that's going to start at 1:15, so make sure you're here because it's going to be a live performance. So thanks, and enjoy your lunch. Well done.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Last bit.